Welcome to Weighing In with Wayless MD and Wellness. My name is Cheri Stoka and I am the host. And I am very excited to introduce a special guest today. His name is Robert Davis, also known as the Healthy Skeptic. Robert has a PhD in public health policy, and as a journalist, I think you are very accomplished in that area. You've been on CNN, you've been cited in the Wall Street Journal, you've been on PBS, WebMD. We're obviously going to talk a little bit more about you and where you came from and how this all came about. But I really wanted to just welcome you to my podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Cheri. Thanks for having me on. It's great to talk to you.
Great. So I'm actually meeting you for the very first time, and of course, very, very honored because your team had reached out to me. It was kind of just out of the blue and asked me if I was interested in reading your new book that was going to be coming out in September. The book called Supersized Lies: How Myths About Weight Loss Are Keeping Us Fat and the Truth About What Really Works. And immediately, I think when I got the email, probably within 30 seconds, I was like, absolutely interested, want to read it. So I went ahead and read it, and then, here we are today. So, you really, you wrote 3 books already. So will this be your 4th book?
Right. Yeah, this is the 4th.
Okay. So tell the audience a little bit more about what really drives you in this area and what really pushed you to kind of dig into this particular area.
Well, certainly to begin with, I have a personal passion when it comes to health. I'm a big advocate of it. I'm a believer in the power of healthy living, and I try to practice what I preach and exercise regularly and eat a healthy diet. But I think what I know what's key is having the right information, because there's so much misinformation. There's so much confusing and conflicting information that people often either throw up their hands and say, I don't know what to believe, or they just ignore it and do what they think is right, which may not be what's best. So I've devoted my career to trying to help people sift through that information, figure out what's believable and what's not. And so as I see it, my job is not to tell people what to do, but it's just to help lead them to information that they are going to find helpful, that's going to be to lead them to things that are going to work for them. And so I have a background, as you mentioned, as a journalist. I also have an academic background in public health and epidemiology and public health. So I've used that training that I have to look through research, to look through studies, and to try to help people understand what the science really says about these issues versus the claims that we often hear, which are not typically or in many cases consistent with the science. And so my previous books were about exercise and about nutrition. So certainly in this case, I'm tackling an issue which is perhaps affects more people than anything else, which is weight management. And it's something that I talk to people about all the time, both professionally and personally. And I know that so many people struggle, and all you have to do is just look at the national statistics and global statistics to know what a problem it is and how difficult it is and how it's a problem that's getting worse with regard to people's struggle to control their weight. And on top of that, knowing how much bad information there is out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that I truly am grateful for people like you who are willing to dedicate all of that time, because, from me, I practice. It'll be very interesting to see how, where this conversation goes, because you have a very, even though we're in the health industry, we have different perspectives, because I treat the patient. I'm actively trying all the things that they tell us. Well, not everything, of course, because, I see through a lot of that stuff. But it'll be very interesting to kind of see where we align, or maybe we see things a little bit different. But it's really the people like you who commit their life to really helping others and getting the information out there. So, one thing that I thought was really important to start with is the research, the studies, because I worked for the big companies. I worked for Y Pharmaceuticals. I worked for Nestle. I worked for Abbott Nutrition. So we were trained to read studies. And it was there that I learned how deceptive and how flawed studies can be because of all of the things that go into that. Who's funding it? What is the objective? What are the things? So talk a little bit about that. I know you talk about that in your book, but if you can help people kind of understand kind of that landscape, I think that would be really helpful.
Right, and we could spend the whole time talking about that because it's such a complex subject. But the bottom line for me is that I'm a believer in science, and I think that despite the flaws that research can have and often does have, it's the best tool we have ever had in the history of civilization to be able to get closer to the truth. Because without research, we're left with anecdotal experiences and hunches and beliefs and guesses. And so that said, there are, as you say, there are certainly shortcomings of research. And what I try to do as I look at the research is to look carefully at studies to understand, as you say, who funded it, because that can have an effect. What the research design did it go for, a week or 2 weeks and test 10 people, or was it for many years and did it test thousands of people? Was it an experimental design that actually is capable of showing cause and effect? Or was it an observational study? So that and other kinds of criteria I look at carefully. And then what I do is try to look at what scientists call the totality of the evidence, which means you look at the evidence as a whole about a subject rather than focusing on one or two studies. Because too often the news media, will say a new study finds avocado will help you lose weight or whatever the subject is. And that's very misleading because one study alone doesn't tell us anything. Even two studies may not tell us anything. And so you have to look at all the studies, look at these factors and try to draw conclusions, the best conclusions you can draw from the information we have. And that's what I try to do in all of my work. And it's certainly what I've tried to do in this book.
Yeah. And that's so important because as you say that, I'm like thinking of all these, I'm a part of so many organizations and I get emails every day saying, oh, new study shows that processed foods doesn't cause, you get like these small little studies and then we wonder why people are so confused.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So let's start with kind of like the big question. Why do you think we're fed so much misinformation about weight loss?
Well, there are a number of reasons. Certainly a big reason, to be very blunt, is money. The weight loss industry is estimated to be worth more than $60 billion. And it's probably more than that at this point, because that's a relatively old estimate. And there are lots of players in that industry that stand to gain a lot from perpetuating these misleading ideas, whether we're talking about food companies or we're talking about supplement makers or gym owners and trainers who tell us, oh, sign up and you'll lose lots of weight. The list goes on, diet peddlers, the list goes on and on with people who have a vested interest in perpetuating these myths. So money is certainly a reason. Also various biases. I talk about these in the book, and there are a number of different biases, but just to name a couple. One is what's called the bandwagon effect, better known as groupthink. So if lots of people, whether we're talking lay people or professionals, sort of glom onto an idea and everyone else seems to believe it, then other people are more likely to believe it. And sort of this kind of groupthink sets in that X approach, you name it, whatever it is, cutting carbs, cutting fat, whatever it is the solution to weight loss. That tends to drive a lot of thinking, even though the research may not show that. And then what I call an allegiance bias. People tend to dig into a certain view and then they won't let it go no matter what. So they believe that, again, fill in the blank, whatever it is, a gluten-free diet is the solution to weight loss, or a vegan diet is the solution, whatever it is. And you see these various camps, and then social media tends to exacerbate that problem because people get in echo chambers and they have reinforcement from people around them that believe likewise. And so these ideas just continue to get perpetuated. So I could go on and on, but I think certainly these kinds of various biases tend to help these misleading ideas, stay alive.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is so complex because it's like, like any issue or any problem in life, you want to find like the root cause, like where does this begin? And it's so difficult because it's like, there's so many players, organizations involved. So, your book obviously highlights many myths. So why don't we talk about the top weight loss myths that you write about in your book?
Well, one certainly is the idea, in my view at least, and based on my reading of the research, that specific villains, that is specific foods or categories of foods, are mainly responsible for weight gain. So that if you cut out whatever kind of food is the villain, whether it's, you know, for 1980s and 90s, it was fat, and then it's carbs, and then it's sugar, and then it's soda, and then it's gluten, whatever it is, that if you cut out a specific food, that's the solution to weight loss. And the answer is that. And so I think that's a myth. That's a big myth, because it boils what is essentially a very complex phenomenon, weight management, down to a specific kind of food. And we just know that there's much more to it than that. And that's why in many cases people are disappointed that a certain kind of diet may work short term, but over the long term it doesn't work, because A, it's more complex than that, but B, because people feel deprived and they can't sustain those diets over time. So I think
Yeah.
this idea, which is very common, I think is a big myth.
Yeah, it's very, very common. I was talking about that not too long ago. I do a radio segment in the area, and you know, people want to assume that exactly that if they just go low carb or if they just go low fat, and at the end of the day, from what I understand, study after study shows no matter what that macro composition is, you give them similar amount of calories, like there's zero difference. So that obviously is a very big one. What else do you have?
I would say another big one is just this idea that weight loss is simply about, you know, eat less, exercise more, move more. Sometimes it's called ELM, ELMM, eat less, move more, and I like to say for many people, Elm Street is a dead end. And they're led to believe that it's all about just cutting your back on what you eat and exercising more. And if you do that, you lose weight. And the corollary to that is if you don't lose weight, there's something wrong with you, that you failed somehow. When in fact, it's the advice that's the failure, not necessarily the people that are trying the advice. And that's because, as I said earlier, you know, weight loss is a phenomenally complex thing. And as some of the people that I interviewed for the book like to point out, it's not just about what you eat, it's also about your mindset. And so the psychology is so important, and certainly the societal influences, all the sort of food environment we're in. And there's so many other factors, our biology, our metabolism, the way that our bodies respond to weight loss and to calorie restriction. So it's a very complex phenomenon. And unfortunately, when it's boiled down to this simple idea, well, just cut back what you eat and exercise more, it's really, I think, not only misleading, but a harmful idea, because it leads people to blame themselves when that approach doesn't work for them.
Yep, exactly. I mean, I think you quoted me. I think people have heard that enough, where I'm constantly saying it's not about the calories. It's not about we can't put ourselves in this, you know, deficit long term. The body's going to respond so quickly to that. And like you said, everyone's so individual that depending on, you know, your DNA, your genetics, I mean, there's so many things that come into play. So I'm glad that you mentioned that one.
Yeah, I would say those are the two big ones. And then throughout the book, I talk about a number of other myths. I have, you know, as you've seen, a number of smaller ideas that are often promulgated. Everything from superfoods, specific foods are the key. So that if you eat avocados, or if you eat chili peppers, or you drink green tea, again, there are lots of these. And then this goes back to research, this misleading that you referred to earlier, where the research that's sponsored almost always by the food industry as a marketing ploy to get us to buy more of those foods. Now, that doesn't mean those foods are unhealthy. It doesn't mean they're not necessarily part of a weight-friendly diet. Certainly avocados can be part of a weight-friendly diet. Nuts can be, green tea can be, a lot of these foods can be, but they by themselves don't have the power to cause us to lose weight. And so we see in the media and on social media these misleading ideas that if only you'll start eating a lot of whatever the food is, then that will be a key to losing weight. Apple cider vinegar, another example that we hear about all the time. So again, I'm not telling people never to consume these foods, that they're bad, but I am saying don't count on them to be a panacea.
Yep, exactly. So along those lines, somewhat, you know, what do you think about the restaurants and, you know, making that decision to post calories? Do you know what the research shows with that? Has that helped at all? And how do you feel about that whole decision?
Well, it certainly stems from laudable motives. I think in theory, it makes sense. If people have access to more information, they're going to make better choices. But I also think, like with all things, there are unintended consequences. And in this case, surprisingly, most of the evidence, if you look at the evidence as a whole, it has not shown that posting calories leads to better choices, that is lower calorie choices or to more healthful choices. And there are a few reasons for that that I get into. But one is that people who often are most in need of that information, who are least educated or most likely to not have all the knowledge they need, are more likely to ignore that information for a variety of reasons. And the people who already are paying attention to calories, they don't need that information necessarily. Or in some cases, people that are prone to disordered eating, that kind of information will exacerbate their condition because they will become even more fixated on what they eat. But another thing that I think that I point out is that it can also lead to food choices that are not in the best interest of our health or our weight. An example I give is if you go into Starbucks and you want to get breakfast and you see there's a raisin cinnamon bagel and you're comparing that against other things, you may find that the raisin cinnamon bagel has the fewest calories, so you're going to get that. But you may be better off, and with regard to your weight and your health, if you get something like a spinach wrap, even though that has more calories, that's going to have more of the nutrients that your body needs. It's going to have fiber, it's going to have protein, it's going to have other nutrients that are going to be beneficial not only for your body but also for managing your weight, because it's going to fill you up more. So sometimes I fear that calorie counts can oversimplify the process of choosing what to eat and prompt people to pick foods that are not necessarily the best foods to eat for a healthy weight.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always wonder too, because the majority of people really don't know what they don't even know their target calorie amount, so they're going in there. I mean, the majority, we see thousands and thousands and thousands of patients and we're educating them on labels. And I can imagine, I mean, if you're not teaching this foundational stuff in the schools or teaching it really, really anywhere, I mean, the information is not out there for people to understand other than a label that says, 2000 based on a 2000 calorie diet. So, it kind of leads me into the question of, my true, thorn inside of kids, these poor kids. I mean, look at these, children are developing adult diseases now. I mean, diabetes, heart disease, fatty liver, and we're not doing anything about this. And what do you think? Why do you think this is not part of school curriculum?
I agree. I think it's an alarming problem that's growing worse by the year, certainly by the decade. If you look at the trends over the last several decades, and I'm no expert on education. Certainly, I do know that there are a lot of competing priorities when it comes to education, and for whatever reason, those people that run schools, by and large, have not decided this is high enough priority. I think it's also our tendency generally in society to put too little emphasis on prevention, whether it's for children or adults, and to put the money and the resources and the attention on trying to fix things rather than prevent them.
Yeah.
And I think with regard to lunches, for example, school lunches, certainly you hear an argument that, well, the kids won't eat that food, so we're just going to give them what they'll eat, which is French fries and pizza, which is I think a ridiculous argument, because if you prepare foods, if you prepare foods that are tasty, healthful foods that are tasty, children and adults will eat them. But it's a matter of putting in the effort to find a way to make foods that people will eat and that are also nutritious. So I think it's a cop-out, but it's certainly what I know that it's often the reason given.
Yeah, I mean, that's another whole 2 hours in itself, right? I mean, it's just what their taste buds are literally trained for, these other foods. So I think, because you obviously talk a lot about the different myths, you bring a lot into your book. What do you think, or what do you believe is the best approach for sustainable weight loss?
Well, certainly with regard to diet, it's the same. And I don't even like to use the word diet because, diet implies some kind of short-term endeavor that once
Right.
you reach a goal, you're going to go off of. So I would say instead of diet, the right term is eating pattern or eating habit. So a lifetime eating pattern that involves whole foods, and meaning fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean meats, dairy, if you include dairy, eggs, nuts, seeds, and minimizes highly processed foods. Now, notice I'm not saying never eat those foods, because I think that is what makes this kind of approach different from a restrictive diet that says never eat these foods, because that's just not realistic. And if anything, right, and if anything, it makes matters worse, because our brains start craving often those foods that we're told never to eat. So we want them even more. So I think the key, and this is not only for our weight, but also for our health overall, is to find a way and to find an eating pattern that works for you using those broad principles that you can sustain over the long term. And the good news here is that you don't have to feel deprived. You don't have to eat foods you don't like. But the key is to find those foods, and those are broad categories of foods that you do like and that you can enjoy and that you will enjoy. And as I said, if you want to have French fries sometimes, if you want to have ice cream sometimes, if you want to have whatever other foods that are highly processed, that's okay. It's just a matter of making them occasional treats and eating them in limited portions rather than having them as everyday staples. Now that takes time. As you say, it takes retraining your taste buds, but I know from my own experience that can be done, because I used to eat a diet that was high growing up and high in highly processed foods. But over time, I learned to retrain my taste buds, and I don't feel deprived at all. But I also know that my body is healthier, and it's been effective for me at being able to maintain a healthy weight.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's usually what I will say when asked, more of that generalized question. I mean, it is about getting away from the processed foods. It's really about because when you start to eat the whole foods, the body starts to rebalance and you're not going to have all of those cravings that you normally have. And the one, I guess, not to always, bring in the negative side of things, but, our food, even the whole foods nowadays is not, not as healthy as it used to be. And they, I think not last week, I read another article about our fruit or strawberries. The vitamins and minerals is like a 1% of what it used to be, say 15, 20 years ago. Do you think this is something that we really need to worry about? I mean, do you think if we just stick to the whole foods, it's good enough, or do you think there's something more going on?
Well, I think that, I guess you have to think about where we're starting from, because for most people, the kinds of diets that they do eat, which is a highly processed diet of fast food and the rest, going from there to eating fruits and vegetables and whole grains and that is such a huge leap that alone, I think for everyone who does that could make a huge difference. Now, beyond that, for people that further want to refine their diets, who are already there and want to further improve, I think there certainly are ways, and this is, I think, where research is continuing to evolve. I would say that right now, in my reading of the research, it's not definitive as to what measures someone can take beyond that right now, but it doesn't mean there aren't things that people shouldn't try. I mean, if taking certain supplements or vitamins might help certain individuals, there's some evidence it might help, and so it may be worth people going in that direction. So I would say that that's an area where we're focusing on in science, and we should really continue to focus on to see what additional measures can add additional benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree there. So, I mean, do you think we should be worried as a nation? When you hear about our nation, you hear about, different countries and the food that they're being fed and the things that are allowed here. Do you think we should be worried and we should be making more drastic steps to get on a healthier plan? Because I think at the end of the day, my business, I'm touching a small, percent of this population, but it's, just like you, we're doing our job to get the word out there. And I feel like it's even, these podcasts that can really try to, get people to make that first step of realizing that, that standard American diet, the SAD diet they have to change that. I mean, would you agree, or do you think our nation is going to kind of stay where it's at, or is it going to get worse? Do you think it's going to get better?
Well, I like to think I'm an optimist, and I would like to hope that more information can prompt people and companies and everyone who's part of this problem to be part of a solution. But I also am realistic enough to know that, that may be wishful thinking. The best that I can do with my small contribution is to try to just get information out to people and to help them understand why it is in their best interest to eat differently. But I think it's important to help people understand that they're up against enormous societal forces, where, as you say, we have lots of we're surrounded by unhealthy foods. There's food everywhere we go. You go to the airport, you go to the cleaners, you go to wherever you go, there's junk food there tempting you. And it's hard to resist that. It really is for a lot of people. And so, and then we see, these relentless advertisements for foods that aren't good for us, advertising fast foods and other junk foods and foods that's cheap. And so, it's hard in a society, the kind of society we live in, to have any kind of comprehensive measures that are going to change that, because they involve laws that restrict people's freedom and so forth. So, I mean, I guess it's a long way of saying that all I can do is hope that more individuals will heed the message and understand that it's in their interest, in their children's interest, to change the way they eat, and that corporate players will see it's in their interest as well, or in the country's interest, to put out more foods that are truly healthful. And again, we have to be careful to distinguish between foods that have a health halo and seem to be healthful, but are really just junk food that's in disguise, or processed food in disguise, versus foods that are truly healthful. And so that, unfortunately, is not a definitive answer, but it is to say that I remain hopeful that over time more people will heed the message.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think, obviously, I think that kind of, brought it all together, because your book outlines so many details of that. And like you said, it's the facts, it's the research that has shown certain claims that to be false, and that type of thing. So I guess, just in maybe summarizing, wrapping up, what would you say would be, what would be the main reasons why people, what type of information are they going to get from reading your book?
I like to think that they're going to get truth telling about what's believable and what's not, to help them make better decisions. So when they encounter claims about this diet or this approach or that supplement is to take, they can either have the specific information from my book about what the research actually says, so they can make a more informed decision, or if it's not specifically addressed in my book, they can at least know the questions to ask, which I try to outline in the book. What questions to ask, how to look at the information you're getting in a way that will help you understand what the truth is, and where to go to get more information if you're not sure. So at least to provide a roadmap to them so that they can make more informed decision.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. So is it still going to be, it'll be out there and available in September? Is that the plan?
Yeah, so the book will be available, the paperback, for sale beginning in September. The ebook is now available for pre-order on Amazon.
Okay.
And if people want to see, I also make videos about these topics at thehealthyskeptic.com. I have a number of videos on nutrition and wellness and weight loss that address a lot of these specific issues. So I invite people, if they're interested, to go there to see some of the videos.
That's awesome. Is there anything else that maybe we missed that you want to get out there, or you wanted to say before we wrap up?
No, that we covered a lot of ground. So they're great questions. So thanks for all the great questions. Yeah,
no problem. It was great talking to you, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed it.